the first time in over 100 years, a member of the British royal family was stripped of every title they held.
Not stepped back, not quietly retired from public life. Formally, legally stripped, by letters patent, by royal warrant, removed from the role of the peerage entirely. That hasn't happened in Britain since 1917, when three of Queen Victoria's German descendants lost their titles for fighting against Britain in World War I. That alone would make 2025 a landmark year. But it wasn't the only seismic shift, and it wasn't even the only royal scandal involving the same disgraced financier. While Buckingham Palace was dismantling one royal's identity piece by piece, Norway's future queen was watching her own son face dozens of criminal charges while her own past correspondence with that same financier resurfaced. Meanwhile, Spain was watching its future queen complete the single most demanding preparation any heir to that throne has ever gone through. Sweden's future queen was learning to fly military aircraft. And across the UK, a princess who'd spent a year fighting cancer walked back into public life in a way that quietly reshaped how the entire institution is perceived. This is the year several European monarchies simultaneously hit a turning point, some by choice, some by scandal, some by sheer biological clock, and at least two of them connected by the same dead man's address book. Here's why people are going to be studying 2025 for decades. Let's start with the story that made headlines on every continent. Prince Andrew's relationship with the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein had been hanging over the British monarchy since 2019, when a widely criticized BBC interview effectively ended his public role. For years, that was treated as resolved, he'd stepped back, the family had moved on. Then in 2025, it reopened violently. Virginia Giuffre, who had accused Andrew of abusing her as a minor trafficked by Epstein, died by suicide in April at age 41. Her posthumous memoir, released that October, reignited the entire scandal at the worst possible moment for the palace. On October 17, Andrew announced he would stop using his title, Duke of York, saying the accusations were distracting from the king's work. That wasn't enough to end the pressure. 2 weeks later, on October 30, Buckingham Palace went further than anyone expected. King Charles formally initiated the process to strip Andrew of his styles, titles, and honors altogether. By early November, letters patent confirmed it: no more, Prince, no more, His Royal Highness, no more Order of the Garter. He became, officially, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, a private citizen in nearly every sense but blood. He kept his place in the line of succession, eighth at the time, simply because removing someone from the succession itself requires agreement from every Commonwealth realm under the Statute of Westminster, a far heavier legal lift than removing a title. But symbolically, the message was unmistakable. The monarchy proved, in real time, that even a son of the late Queen wasn't untouchable. For an institution that survives almost entirely on public consent, that was as significant a moment as any coronation. While that story dominated headlines, something quieter but arguably just as important was happening with the king's daughter-in-law. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had spent much of 2024 out of public view following a cancer diagnosis and treatment. By 2025, she was back, visibly, steadily, taking on a heavier public schedule than she'd carried in years. It's easy to treat that as just a personal recovery story, but for a monarchy whose long-term stability depends on having a credible, popular future queen consort, Catherine's return mattered structurally, not just emotionally. Combined with King Charles continuing his own cancer treatment throughout the year while still carrying out engagements, 2025 became the year the British monarchy's two most senior generations were both, quite literally, fighting to stay functional at the same time. Now here's where the story gets genuinely strange, because Britain wasn't the only monarchy whose 2025 scandal traced back to Jeffrey Epstein. In Norway, Crown Princess Mette-Marit, married to Crown Prince Haakon and, in line to become queen herself one day, had her own connection to Epstein resurface that year. Norwegian palace officials had previously claimed she'd cut off contact with him back in 2013. Documents that emerged later directly contradicted that, showing email correspondence between the two continuing well after Epstein had already pleaded guilty to sexual misconduct involving minors. The content of those emails, once it became public, did real damage, casual, even warm language about a convicted sex offender, the kind of correspondence that's almost impossible to explain away once it's out in the open. And that wasn't even the worst of Norway's year. In August 2025, Mette-Marit's son from a previous relationship, Marius Borg Høiby, was charged with 32 separate offenses, including allegations of rape against 2 former partners. Some reporting suggested the family had received preferential treatment from police during the investigation, though authorities never confirmed that. The case ballooned from there. By the time his trial actually began in February 2026, the charge count had grown to 40, including additional allegations of reckless behavior and violating a restraining order while he was already facing prosecution. The most serious charges carried potential sentences of more than 10 years. Put those 2 threads together, the Epstein correspondence and her son's criminal trial, and you understand why a Norwegian poll taken as the case unfolded showed a sizable share of the public actively saying they didn't want Mette-Marit to become queen one day. For an heir-in-waiting who had spent 2 decades carefully rebuilding her public image after entering the royal family as a single mother with a complicated past, 2025 undid a meaningful chunk of that work in a single year. So now you've got 2 monarchies, Britain and Norway, both spending 2025 confronting scandals that trace back either directly or indirectly to the same convicted predator, both being forced to publicly demonstrate that royal status doesn't buy protection from consequences. That's already an extraordinary coincidence for 1 calendar year. But turn south, to Spain, and you get the exact opposite story playing out at the same time. Princess Leonor entered the 3rd and final year of an unprecedented 3-year military training program in September 2025, training at the Air and Space Academy in San Javier after already completing a full year with the Army and a full year with the Navy. By the time that program wrapped, she'd become the first heir in Spanish history, male or female, to complete full officer track training across all 3 branches of the armed forces, including parachute training that made her one of the only royals anywhere in the world to ever do that. That's not just a personal milestone for one princess. It's Spain's answer to the same underlying problem Britain and Norway were confronting from the opposite direction. Instead of damage control after the fact, it's deliberate, years-long trust building before the fact. Spain spent 3 full years making sure that when Leonor eventually takes the crown, nobody can credibly say she hasn't earned the public's confidence. And remarkably, Spain wasn't alone in that strategy in 2025. Sweden's Crown Princess Victoria spent the year deep in her own military training, which had begun the previous fall. By January, she'd started formal military strategy instruction. By spring, she was wearing a military uniform to major royal events for the first time. By autumn, she was training with the Swedish Air Force and flying over the country's north. 2 future queens, in 2 different countries, both spending 2025 doing the same thing, proving themselves through rigorous, very public, very deliberate institutional training, at almost exactly the same time that 2 other future monarchs, in Britain and Norway, were dealing with the fallout of scandal. Step back and look at the full pattern across the continent. In Britain, the monarchy spent 2025 cutting away a member who'd become a liability, while simultaneously watching its 2 future queens in waiting, Catherine, eventually, and far down the line, Princess Charlotte, represent the human, resilient face of the institution. In Norway, the family spent the year publicly absorbing the consequences of a scandal that directly threatened whether its own future queen would ever be trusted with the role. In Spain and Sweden, 2 heirs apparent spent the year visibly earning the right to inherit, through training programs explicitly designed to build public trust before it's ever tested. 4 countries, 2 completely different responses to royal vulnerability, all converging in the same 12 months. None of it coordinated, all of it pointing at the exact same underlying question: does this institution still deserve the public's confidence going into its next generation? That's really what makes this year different from any other recent royal news cycle. Most years bring one big story, a wedding, a death, a single scandal. 2025 brought a continent-wide reckoning happening in parallel, across multiple royal houses, none of them coordinated with each other, all pointing at the same fault line. You'd have to go back to the early 1990s, the period when the British monarchy weathered Windsor Castle catching fire, multiple royal marriages collapsing in the same year, and the Queen herself publicly calling it her annus horribilis, to find a stretch where this many fundamental pressures on the institution converged at once. The difference is that in the 1990s, the crisis was largely contained to Britain, and the monarchy was mostly reacting after the damage was already done. In 2025, the same pressures hit at least 4 different royal houses in the same 12-month window, and you can see 2 genuinely different survival strategies playing out side by side in real time. Britain and Norway cutting away or absorbing what they could no longer defend, while Spain and Sweden spent the year building up exactly the kind of public trust they'll need to survive the next 50 years intact. Both are forms of the same institution trying to protect itself. They just look completely different depending on which country you're watching. There's also a quieter thread running underneath all of this, and it's worth naming directly. Nearly every one of these stories, in one way or another, runs through the same disgraced financier. Epstein has been dead since 2019, but in 2025, his shadow reached into 2 separate European royal families at once, in 2 very different ways, one through a brother's decades-old friendship, one through a future queen's own email inbox. That's not a coincidence about any one family's character. It's a reminder of just how deeply that one man's network reached into the kind of elite social circles royal families have always moved through, and how long the consequences of that network keep surfacing, years after his death. So if you're wondering why royal commentators keep calling 2025 a hinge point rather than just another busy year for the tabloids, this is why. It's not one headline. It's an entire continent's worth of monarchies independently arriving at the same moment of reckoning, each handling it in their own way, and the version of European royalty that comes out the other side of this decade is going to look noticeably different from the one that went into it. If you want to go deeper on any one of these threads, Andrew's full fall from grace, the Norwegian trial that's still unfolding, are exactly what Leonor's 3-year training actually involved. Let me know in the comments which one you want covered next, and subscribe so you don't miss it.